What's up, YouTubers? So for today's video, we are going to do some experimenting, and I'm going to do something that I've never done before, and that is run smaller diameter. So we got 035 dual shield flux core wire, and we're going to run it with the MIG welder that I've been using, the Firepower FP200. Now, I have run flux core wire before with gas shielding, and obviously you've seen me do it without gas, but I've never ran this small of a wire. Generally, when you get to stuff like this, you're welding big, thick, heavy plates, and you're welding with 045 or even bigger wires. So, you know, this is more or less something you could run in your 200 amp home hobby or decent, you know, MIG welder that might give you better capability, you know, for welding thick steel, I guess. But we won't know that until we test it and find out what happens. So that's what we're going to tackle today. Let's get into it. So right off the bat here, this part number, which I bought this off of Amazon, it's Blue Demon wire. It's E71T-1C//1M. That is this particular product. Now, ESAB also makes a dual shield wire. I don't have the part number, but I'll put it up here in 035. Very few companies make 035 dual shield wire. Lincoln, I believe, does, possibly, but you know, this isn't something that's that common, and this isn't something you can just go down to your Home Depot, your Tractor Supply, or any of those and just buy it off the shelf. I've never seen dual shield wire on the shelf at any box store, and this is something you would either get online or at a legitimate welding store. So with that said, I just want to explain a little bit about what this product actually is. So when you look at this here, you can see it says E71T blah 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 035. Most of this wire is 045 and bigger, so that's a little unusual. This comes as an 11 pound, which I don't know, I thought most spools were 10 or whatever. I'm probably wrong on that. I don't do that much wire welding, but 11 seemed kind of odd. And then over here you can see flux core carbon steel gas shielded. So normal flux core wire, like everybody sells, is self-shielding. It's called FCAW-S. This uses shielding gas in addition to the shielding gas created by the flux that's inside of this wire. The benefit of dual shield is that it allows you to run settings, and typically that, say, normal flux core would, and it allows you to have less chance of porosity. Now, if you've watched any of my previous testing videos where I've covered like welding thicker plates and I use flux core wire self-shielded, you're going to notice a decent tendency on thicker plates for porosity to pop out where you least want it. And that is due to the fact that that molten pool quenches so fast that the gas doesn't have time to escape. And by gas, I mean the flux turns to gas inside the molten pool, and when it can't escape fast enough, you're left with holes from that gas. Well, flux core dual shield wire, which that's a brand name for this, can help solve that because the composition of flux in this wire is different, and the additional shielding gas helps prevent oxidization per se of it. Now, this is all in theory. I say in theory because I've never ran this product before. I've actually never ran an 035 flux core, only much thicker wire. And I don't know whether or not this is actually a viable product to use. And I was interested in this for a long time now, and people have asked me about it. So I thought, well, why not buy a spool of this? Because we can all learn, including myself, as to what the benefits are. The main thing I'm hoping for on this is less porosity across the board. So when I weld 1/4 inch and attempt to weld 3/8 inch steel with this product, I'm hoping that the porosity that I'm seeing with just straight gas shielded flux core is less. Does it mean it will be? Well, we can hope. I can hope. Now, another thing I'll mention really quick is that flux core wire like this is basically a hollow tube, okay? This particular product may have a thicker tube wall per se than a normal non-gas shielded flux core wire. I say that kind of just under the assumption that it's likely what's going on. And what I mean by that is when you're using gas shielding, in addition to what's in the wire, you could probably get by with a lot less flux, and a lot less flux would be a great thing to help prevent porosity because you don't have as much of that flux turning to gas. At least that's my theory. So again, we're going to find out on that. Last thing I promise, and we'll actually get to trying this. This wire, and it doesn't even say it here, welds on DCEP. Normal flux core wire is DCEN. So we have a change in polarity, so make sure you're welding on the correct polarity. If you don't weld this on the correct polarity, your results will be poor at best. So with that said, let's get into it. So I got this big ass spool in here, and a couple things I noticed. One, I mean, it spins freely and that's good, but it's kind of a pain to get this big of a spool in here. I've been using the little mini ones, and there's so much wire on this that I'll be honest, you know, I'm a little afraid that this might just slip off the side and then whoop, bird's nest out of there. I don't know, but it would have been nice if the spool was a little bit longer just to help keep that wire from popping over, like a little bit of pull off to the side, and that's all she wrote. But I don't know, I think it'll be all right. Now, in this particular welder, it spools off that in the bottom. You want to make sure that where it feeds into your feed rollers, that it's somewhat of a straight line. If I would have ran it down here and then in here, this thing would be all jacked up. So make sure you have your spool loaded correctly. Also, make sure you're using flux cord rollers. These rollers are knurled to grip the wire. The reason is that you can't run much clamping pressure between the roller and the idler, or the drive roller, because it'll crush the core of this. Because remember, it's a little hollow tube, and if you crush that core, you can get undesirable like welding, okay? So you gotta run knurled rollers, and I generally run fairly low tension because you don't need a lot of tension because the roller itself that's knurled grips the side. Now, settings wise, this chart, nowhere on here does it say anything about dual shield wire. And your home hobby machine likely will have no settings for it as well. So what I'm going to do is look up actual settings either by this company, Blue Demon, or just like a generic one online just as a starting point. And I'm going to make a weld and then look at it and try and adjust it based on just good practice to try and get it dialed in. And that's something you're going to face when you're doing stuff like this, is that there's no chart or program if your machine has a LCD screen in most home hobby welders for this stuff, so you're kind of on your own. The last thing I'll say, I am running C25 gas. If you have 100% CO2, most dual shield wires do not use that, so you have to use C25 or whatever gas blend they recommend for the dual shield. So let's go and do a test weld. All right, so I had to look up quite a lot of, clean that off, Jesus. I had to look up a bunch of settings because, well, for one, there aren't that many companies that make this product, and two, I looked up, well, Blue Demon and ESOB and Lincoln, and they all had completely different parameters for what would be usable for their wires. So I don't really know, other than a ballpark, of where to start. So it appears this product runs at higher voltage than normal gas shielded MIG and just straight flux core. So my settings, just as a start, is 23 volts and 290 inches per minute for wire feed. Now I have a feeling the wire feed's going to be a tad bit on the low side, the voltage might be a tad bit on the high side. I don't know that, but we're going to have to make a test and find out. It's going to be interesting because, like I said, I've never ran this small of a wire, and I think there's going to be at least some issues for us to work through to hopefully get it to work. Now, The stick out with this product, I believe, is somewhere between 5/8 and 3/4 of an inch. You tend to run more stick out with dual shield wire than with straight flux core. Now with that said, I've never ran 035, so it might actually be closer to 1/2 inch or 5/8, but I'm gonna try and favor a little bit longer of a stick out, and we'll see what happens. I will be doing a drag angle. The old saying, like my welding instructor said back in the day, was if it has slag, you drag, so that's what we're gonna do. Problems already. So I knew I had a couple issues going on. It's not feeding through this. The rollers are slipping, so I'm going to increase the roller tension. All right, I am back. Now, quite an interesting issue. So if you recall, I had mentioned that it's kind of weird that the spool, there's so much wire on it that the wire could slip off the spool. Well, that's actually what happened. It wasn't that the rollers weren't biting. The wire popped off the spool, and luckily only about 3 wraps went around it. The weird thing is that I fed it out fast with the cold feed button. It didn't have an issue, and I've tested a bunch right now and it seems to be fine. So I don't know how it popped off of there, but it did. So I got everything back on and same settings. Let's run another test. Well, that went a little bit better. Let's just zoom in and take a look at what we got. So for an initial set point of running 23 volts, 290, I would say that it welded pretty good. I don't see any evidence of porosity on the surface. The bead appearance looks pretty good. It's not like a bead of caulk per se, it's fairly flat. My stick out distance, I think I favored a little bit too close to the plate at the start, like the first half. I lengthened a little bit and it seemed to have widened a little bit, but I like the way that that looks. It's really not bad looking. So that's kind of a surprise that I could get it at least reasonably close with no idea what I'm doing. So now I think what I'll do is I'm going to run a couple more beads, just see what I think of it, maybe adjust some settings, and then we'll actually weld a joint and look at that. So, did some test welds, kind of fooled around a little bit, plus or minus a volt or some wire, a little bit extra wire, a little bit less. And I mean, basically somehow I nailed it right off the bat to make at least a decent looking bead on plate. I then took those same settings and ran a fillet weld where I welded one side and then basically went on the back, welded it while it was hot, just to kind of see how it would perform. And I'm happy to share the fact that I don't see any porosity on any of this, which is a huge deal to me. That's kind of what I was hoping for, because when I've welded with gasless flux core on quarter, I've noticed like the tendency to have porosity, and I don't really see any evidence of it. Yeah, even that, I mean, maybe a little bit right here, but that plate was like 500 degrees, and let me look at that. Yeah, no, that's not even porosity. So yeah, so that looks good. And now I wasn't gonna do a cut and etch for this, but I realized I'd probably be letting you guys down. So I wanna save a cut and etch on actual thicker plate for a comparison video where I'm gonna shoot flux core, gas shielded MIG, and then dual shield, and we're gonna look at cut and etches to kind of get an idea of that. So I'm gonna save the fillet weld for another time. But I did cut this plate, and I did etch it, and the results are kind of interesting. So let's look at those. So this picture isn't the best. You can blame the cameraman for it. But when we look at this, there's virtually no penetration. The lighter silver part on that you can see is the actual weld. There's like a weird secondary heat affected zone somehow that came out in the etch, and I've never seen that on any test I've ever done with any process. That's the first time I've ever seen it, so I'm not exactly sure what it is. It is not penetration, but it's some kind of change to the heat affected zone. The weld on the right is two welds. Basically, I overlapped them, so that's why it looks bigger, but you can actually see both welds. But yeah, very little penetration. So let's look at a little bit different shot. Again, sorry for the poor photo, but you look, that's not weld penetration, that's heat affected zone or something. I mean, it makes it look like it made it almost all the way through the plate, but it's just sitting on there. Like I said, if you got any ideas on what that might be, why that would affect it in that manner, and in most other processes it doesn't, let me know. But I fooled around with a bunch of different settings for these. These weren't all run at the same, and I'm kind of surprised that no matter what settings I ran, it had the same kind of very limited penetration. I've never seen that little of penetration on, any process, to be honest, but who knows, we got to do further testing to kind of see what's going on here. It's possible that 035 wire just isn't going to penetrate very well on thick plate. Yeah, interesting. Well, let's go to conclusion. All right, well, in conclusion, what did we learn today? I learned that this product seems to work pretty good. There's a couple things I want to mention though. One, your MIG machine may not be able to hit high enough voltage to run this stuff. And what I mean by that is I was running 23 volts. What I find is a lot of the cheaper MIG welders out there can only hit like 20, 21 volts, maybe 22. If your, MIG machine can't hit, I'd say at least 25 volts, I think that you're going to have a hard time using this stuff. I mean, the main purpose of this is basically to be able to weld thicker plate and put down some clean welds on them. Not really, this stuff isn't really meant to be welding like 1/8 inch thick. I mean, you'd use hardwire MIG for that if you think of it. So, because you're using the same gas anyway, so the main reason you use this is for thick plate. Well, with that said, if your welder doesn't have enough voltage, good luck using this. I was running somewhere around 23, and I think it could use a little bit more voltage, and then based on the penetration you saw on the cut and etch of this, there really isn't a whole lot at those settings. I think I need more wire and then more voltage. And the spec on this says something like 20 to 30 volts, which is a hell of a range, to be honest. But at 23 volts, I think 25, 26, and then more wire might have benefited this and given me better penetration. So I guess in a roundabout way, I'm just trying to simplify it. If you got a less powerful welder or a lower voltage MIG welder, don't waste your time with this product. If you got a decent welder, it might be an option. And I'm going to be doing a lot more testing with this product, so we're really going to see what the limitations are, at least for my welder anyways. So yeah, with that said, I like the way it runs. It makes clean welds. It welded the 1/4 inch plate better than normal gas shielded because there's no porosity, especially the internal weld structure looks perfect, which is what I want. So yeah, I mean, so far face value, I like it. It's clean, the slag comes off good. Not much more to say than that. Now, I also wanted to kind of a bit of humor. This tamper proof, because You know, you can see how tore up this box is, like everything else I get from Amazon, but like tamper-proof, yeah, okay, whatever. Almost looks like this stuff was returned at one point, to be honest. But hey, it works good, no real issues there. And I guess the future videos I'll do where I test this will kind of tell you if it's going to work for you or not. And I mean, this stuff's a little bit pricey because it's about 50 bucks for a 11-pound spool, and you have to run gas, so it's not cheap. So why waste the money if it's not going to do anything for you? With that said, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. If you got any questions, comments, you know where to leave them. Till next time, guys.